The Celtics bounced back from a tough loss on Sunday night with a 129-119 win over the Utah Jazz on Tuesday. This was the Derrick White game. We'll talk about how he made history as well as carried the Celtics team in the fourth quarter. We'll talk about Jaylen Brown's streak, Payton Pritchard, big-time Anfernee Simons game, and a whole lot more in just a moment here.
Jaylen Brown with the flush. Tatum the drive. Tatum the finish. It is banner 18. The mission commanded is mission accomplished.
We talked about the Celtics having a bad loss on Sunday night against the Portland Trail Blazers, and I didn't want to say too much about that game because it was just one bad game, and they haven't had a whole lot of those. And they had a couple opportunities now to get back in the win column against inferior opponents that have been playing pretty well. The Utah Jazz entered this game with wins off of the Detroit Pistons, off the San Antonio Spurs, and right off the bat, you can tell this is a Jazz team that might not have a great record, but has a lot of really talented players. Keontae George was one of the most talented players I think the Celtics have faced all season long, or at least, one of the best performances that they've seen all season long by an individual. And so it wasn't a smooth start. Right away, they go down by double digits. Defensively, they were struggling a little bit here. And in the first half, Derrick White only has 5 points. Payton Pritchard only has 5 points. And it feels like, okay, it's going to be another one of those nights where the backcourt struggles. And maybe Jaylen Brown has to shoulder a little bit too much of the load, and it's just not enough to get out a win. And everything changed in the second half because Derrick White took this game over. He ends up finishing the game with 27 points, 22 of which came in the second half. And his stat line is just a ridiculous one. If you're watching this podcast in video form, watch it in full. You can see 7 rebounds, 7 blocks, 6 assists, 9 of 9 from the free throw line, 8 of 16 from the field. To do all of this in a night where you did not have it going from downtown, he was 2 of 10 from 3, is kind of what makes this performance even more remarkable. The 7 blocks, by the way, is tied for the most ever by an NBA guard with a handful of other guards. And it's the most ever by a Celtics guard, and it's the most of his career. So this is just, it's a ridiculous amount of blocks. It feels like he should be putting up these kinds of numbers more often because so often he's adjusting shots, he's forcing misses, he's deflecting passes and doing other things that maybe have the intended impact of a blocked shot, but don't show up as a blocked shot on the stat sheet. But tonight he actually got the 7 blocks. He impacted Lauri Markkanen's shot a couple of times. He had some chase down blocks. He had a whole slew of them. It's worth watching a Derrick White block compilation from this game because they were a lot of fun plays. So defensively, he's done it all season long. And Joe Mazzulla talked after the game about how he's shouldering more responsibilities in the defensive end than he has in previous years. I mean, we know Drew Holiday last year was the free roamer. He was kind of the eyes and ears of that defense. And Derrick is assuming a lot of those responsibilities now. So even earlier in the season, when he wasn't shooting the ball well, and still when you look in aggregate, his shooting numbers are way down from last season. Joe has continued to stress like what he brings to this team is so much more than just his shooting and just his efficiency. And the defense is where it's at. And you look at tonight's performance, perfect encapsulation of what he's able to do on the defensive end, but then also offensively, 22 second half points was the difference in this game. Derrick White's fourth quarter shot making was the difference in this game. I don't even know what to make of a night where Derrick starts cold because it feels like he turns it around so often. Like it's just in his blood to turn around these bad shooting starts and close games well. And tonight was a perfect example of that. And tonight he was the star that powered them to a win. It's been a lot of Jaylen Brown love on this podcast. And I am going to talk a little bit about Jaylen Brown in tonight's episode because his 30-plus point streak comes to an end, ties with Larry Bird for nine consecutive games of that. But this is really the Derrick White game. And we haven't had as many Derrick White games as maybe I expected we would have going into the season. And it's because he struggled a little bit to convert good looks that he's had. And the tides have started to turn. Tonight was a good example of that. But defensively, it has never wavered. And that's really what I think this stat line encapsulates. I mean, he got posterized in this game. He had some lows. He had a lot of missed threes consecutively. And yet he finishes this game on top. And was kind of laughing post game in his exit interview, sideline interview with Abby Chin, that he didn't know that Walter Payton Jr. even had that in his bag, that ability to posterize him. But he's a guy that's going to keep jumping because he's looking to make winning plays. He's looking to block shots. And I always say, like, guys that don't get posterized are guys that aren't trying to block everything. And so if you're a guy that has a lot of posters, like Giannis is a guy that's been posterized quite a bit in his career, it's because he tries to contest everything, right? It's a sign of a winning basketball player and a true competitor. And Derrick White is certainly that. And so I'm thrilled to see that for Derrick because I think that he has been hard on himself for stretches of the season. He's been down, he's been upset, frustrated. He was obviously down on himself at the conclusion of Sunday's loss to the Blazers because him and Jaylen Brown had a couple of miscommunications, a couple of turnovers that I think were mostly attributed to Jaylen on the box score, but Derrick took responsibility post game for those misreads and a couple of bad passes, a backcourt violation, one time where he stayed too long on a screen, but he bounces back beautifully in this game. And just as you would want him to, just as he would want to. And now the Celtics are back in the win column. They're 20-12. And it's part of why I didn't want to over scrutinize the loss on Sunday because ultimately now they've won, 10 of their last 13 games. Not a bad place to be. They're 9-3 in the month of December. They've been one of the best teams in the entire NBA all of December. I expect Jaylen Brown to be player of the month. Like a lot of good things are happening here. And tonight they were able to get back on track against a team that, is not the best, but has been playing pretty well as of late. Speaking of bounce backs, we talked about Derrick White. Payton Pritchard had a not a good game against the Portland Trail Blazers. And it's back-to-back years that he has, gone to Portland where he grew up and hasn't necessarily had the performance that he's hoping to have with maybe a lot of pressure, a lot of expectations. He has a lot of family there. Obviously was an Oregon star. But one thing that Payton has done all season long, and this is not a new phenomenon, when he has a bad game, you can all but know for certain that he is going to have a really good game the next night. Like that's just been the story of the season, which is why if you look through his game log, it almost looks like there's been some highs and lows because when there's a bad game, he just responds accordingly. I think of a good example, like he had a bad game against Minnesota. That was the 42-point night that Jaylen Brown had, or 41.9. And then the next night, no Derrick White, Payton Pritchard goes off for 42 against the Cavs. Like he knows how to get back on track. Tonight wasn't a night where he took over the game by any means. And like Derrick, he struggled from 3-point range. So Derrick's 2 for 10, Payton's 1 for 7. So they're combined, 3 of 17. And yet the backcourt was awesome in this game, which I love to see because I don't want their value to be associated with just their 3-point shooting. Like they're much more than just 3-point shooters. And I know on paper, that's a big strength of both of their games, and particularly Payton's, and honestly Derrick's as well. But they're dynamic players that can do a lot more than just shoot. And in this game, Payton is 18 points, 8 of 15 shooting. He got to that mid-range shot a whole lot. And that spot now between the restricted area and the outside of the paint, so like that paint mid-range spot, which is different than where Jaylen gets his looks. Jaylen takes the more of the mid-range shots from outside of the paint. That is just automatic for Payton now. And Scal said it in the broadcast, there is no other player like Payton Pritchard. He is one of one. It's true. He's 6 feet tall, and the spots that he's getting from the floor, his footwork, it's ridiculous. And so in this game, if you look at his efficiency from inside the arc, he was 7 of 8 from inside the arc. And these are tough finishes. This is not like he's getting wide open layups, but that's what he has, perfected his craft. He spends all summer hiring friends and getting guys from overseas to come play against him. And what he's doing is finishing those kinds of plays, like going 1-on-3 in the paint, turnarounds, those sort of moves. And so he's seeing the fruits of his labor now come to fruition when now you're looking at the top 10 of ISO scorers in the NBA. He's on that list. And in fact, I saw a list today of top 15 most efficient actions in the NBA. That includes pick and rolls, ISOs, all sorts of things. Payton Pritchard ISO is on that list, which is kind of mind-boggling when you think about his size and you think about the fact that who else could be on that list, right? Some of the greatest scorers in the game. He's on there. So consistency is still the thing that he's working toward. Most of these guys, outside of Jaylen Brown, really every single player on this roster has had some struggles with inconsistency. And even Jaylen, it's not like every night has been perfect, even though the scoring's been a consistent thing. But his ability to bounce back is huge. It shows a level of mental fortitude, and it also shows that he knows what he needs to fix, right? And he comes back and he does it. And in this game, they didn't need 42 from him, right? They got 27 from Derrick. They got 23 from Jaylen Brown. They got 20 from Anfernee Simons. They got 15 from Luka Garza. Like there was some good scoring across the board, but he was able to kind of give you what you needed, what the game needed. Had some very timely baskets in that second half, 13 points for him in the second half after a slower first half as well. Like Derrick White, both those guys really kind of upped it in the second. So just good to see, because I've said this before. I've said this last year when in the backcourt was Jrue Holiday and Derrick White, but your backcourt production really matters. And at the end of the day, I think both of these guys have the ability to be like all-star level talents. The Celtics are campaigning for them to be all-stars this season. I said this, I don't think they're going to get there. Derrick's making a little bit of a push, especially if you're actually looking at the game defense and offense. Derrick actually has like a pretty solid case, but they're probably not going to get there. That being said, I think there's a reason why they're being campaigned hard. And I think that if you ask NBA coaches across the league, everybody says Derrick White's the most underrated player in the league. They still say that, even though he's less underrated than he once was, because everybody knows how great he is, right? Even still, both of these guys have a level they can get to. And I think sometimes you see that level. Tonight was one of those nights. And that's what stood out to me most in this game, is that this was a good backcourt game. And you want to start stacking those up, because come playoff time, like, you want those guys to be consistent scorers for this team, especially if Tatum's not back. I mean, I don't know if he will or won't be. I think he will, but you want those guys to kind of be playing at their best. And so I was encouraged by what we saw on that standpoint tonight. I want to give a quick shout out to our friends over at PrizePicks. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Whether you're starting a new routine or making player picks for the first time, trying something new can be hard, but in life and on PrizePicks, it always feels good to be right. With high-pressure playoff matchups every weekend and elite hoop action almost every night, the action never stops. And PrizePicks lets you take control. PrizePicks is simple. It's so easy to use. There's a new feature alert. PrizePicks now has early payouts. If your player gets off to a hot start, you're going to have the option to cash out those winnings before the game even finishes. There are some players that get off to hot starts. You don't have to wait to see how the rest of the game's going to go. You can get some early winnings. And find your community on PrizePicks. With the new social feed features, you can share your PrizePicks with your friends, copy lineups from winners with a single click, copy lineups you like, or use them as inspiration for your own picks. You can even follow PrizePicks partners like us and tail or fade our picks with just one click. PrizePicks puts their users first, so all withdrawals are fast and secure. PrizePicks accepts most major payment methods, making deposits into your account quick and easy this sports season. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, it's good to be. So I talked about Derrick White and Payton Pritchard and how really their performances were so key to this win. And I also want to talk about Luka Garza, let me talk about Jaylen Brown first. Jaylen Brown entering tonight, all eyes were on Jaylen, because obviously he's been playing at this ridiculous pace, the ridiculous level of scoring consistency. Entering tonight, he was averaging north of 32 points on the month, which is the highest average in Celtics history. I don't know if he still has that after this 23-point night, but he came out a little cold out of the gates, and pretty early on, I was like, okay, I think the 30-point streak is going to snap tonight. He actually fell. It was kind of within striking distance, because he only played the last 5 minutes of that fourth quarter and finished with 23 points, and he went, I think, 3 of 5 in that straight stretch for mid-range. So it wasn't like it was like totally out of the question, but he finally had a slow start, and we haven't seen a whole lot of that from him throughout this month. Finishes with 23 points on 9 of 19 shooting, 4 of 6 in the line. But the part of it that I love is 10 assists and only 2 turnovers. And he saw a lot more doubles and a lot more, even at times where the Jazz threw 3 bodies at him in this game than he has seen for most of the season. I don't know how much of that is maybe Utah saw some of the success that Portland had in the second half of that game when they doubled Jaylen, because he did see more doubles than he's seen most of the season in that second half in particular. And it resulted in some turnovers, and it resulted in him having a much quieter second half than he did at first half. So maybe it was a little bit of like, you know what, it worked for Portland. Let's give it a try. I wouldn't say that it worked for the Jazz here. He didn't score 30. The record now ends at 9 games. He's tied with Larry Bird. It's a remarkable record. I honestly thought he was going to do it, because at one point I started feeling like the 30-point nights were getting kind of automatic. But similar to, like, this is obviously not at the same scale, but like LeBron had that double-digit streak, right, where he scored at least 10 points for like 20 years worth of basketball games. And how does it end? It ended on a pass to a game winner. I think it was Rui that hit the corner 3 game winner. And afterwards, LeBron was saying that it was very fitting, right, that streak ended with him making the right play. This streak is obviously not of that magnitude, but the reality is that Jaylen Brown saw this was the kind of night where he's going to get doubled a lot, and rather than forcing the issue and taking 25 shots, he took 19 shots, which is 2.5 less than what he's averaged on the season. And he finished with 10 assists, which is one of his best assist games of the year. And he created opportunities for others. There were some plays that he kicked it out, and then it was a hockey assist where the guy turned down a good shot for a better shot. But in general, I think you saw his continued maturation and ability to read the game and make the right play, make the right read, things that he's been stressing for a long time, things that Joe Mazzulla has been stressing for a long time. They talk about this a lot. I've talked about this a lot. A lot of times people think about, this guy's playing selfish or playing unselfish. And when it comes to somebody like Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, these guys that have been in the league for almost a decade that are just focused on winning, it's like a night where he turns the ball over down the stretch trying to drive to the basket. It's not like Jaylen was selfish in those moments, right? If Payton makes the wrong read, like I think opening night, Payton took 2 shots in the final seconds and he missed the kick out, right? There was maybe you guys don't remember what I'm talking about, but there was a loss to the 76ers on opening night at TD Garden, and Payton Pritchard missed like multiple attempts to win that game. And people afterwards were saying, oh, like that was a selfish play. It's not a selfish play, it's the wrong read, right? If he wasn't the right shot to take, the better play would have been to make the pass. Jaylen, at time, I think people have perceived him as somebody that's like more focused on getting his own points, his own baskets. And it's not really accurate. Maybe at a point in his career was, but this version of Jaylen Brown for the last few years is focused on making the right read. And oftentimes the right read is for him to get to that mid-range spot where he's one of the best scorers in the NBA, to get to the line, to draw fouls. Tonight's game, it was to make the pass, and he was happy to do it. And in turn, the streak snaps. But he puts together another really nice stat line. I thought he might get a triple-double, which would have been ironic because that's like the only 2 games out of the last like 20 games or 15 games that he's played that he didn't hit the 30-point mark was the triple-double nights, but he ended up finishing with 6 rebounds here. But I think this game was a continued reflection of like his maturation as a player. And I am kind of curious to see if more teams are going to try to double him to force the ball out of his hand after seeing the way that he has started the season from a scoring standpoint, basically saying like, we're not going to let Jaylen beat us, let somebody else beat us. I think he would welcome that. I think he's happy to make the right play, and guys like Derrick and Payton and Anfernee are going to step into those shots and hit tough ones and hit clean ones because they're going to get a lot of clean looks too. And speaking of Anfernee Simons, he was a plus 27 tonight in his 28 minutes. And he's just been consistently trending upwards. And with that, he's been getting more and more praise from Joe Mazzulla, has been kind of going out of his way to say, like, this guy sacrificed a lot. He's flying under the radar, but he's playing really good basketball. His attention to detail is great. And I went back and watched earlier in the season because there was a lot of discussion around, like, should he be playing more? I thought that his minutes were appropriate earlier in the season because even though he was scoring in bunches and he had that like ridiculous heater in Orlando, when you go back and break down the film, like he was making a lot of mistakes and it was natural, right? He's adjusting to a completely new system. He hasn't been a defensive minded player historically. And now he's playing for a franchise that really values defense and a head coach that's not going to let you get away with bad defensive possessions. And so Anfernee Simons has made a lot of progress over the last few months. And we're not even at the midway point of the season. And already I can feel like he's a much better defender than he was earlier on. Don't know if the advanced analytics necessarily reflect that yet. I'll dive into those. But just from watching him, he's just competing more. He's fouling less. He's pressuring the ball. Like he's made strides in that regard. And so tonight, he's a plus 27 in a game that they won by 10. The second best plus minus of the game was Luka Garza's plus 13. So it's like this, they have been better with him on the floor. And as of a couple of days ago, he had the best plus minus rating of any player in the NBA for the month of December, which there's a lot of great players and there's a lot of great teams. So it's a pretty reflective stat of the fact that they've just been good with him on the floor. And if he was a catastrophic defender, that would not be the case because teams would just be going at him every time and the Celtics defense would be collapsing. But that's not what's happened, right? So he gives them the 20 points, 5 rebounds, and 4 assists. He holds his own defensively, and it has increasingly so, and the praise has followed. So I don't know what his future holds. Obviously, he's on an expiring deal. There's been a lot of buzz around, like, are they going to potentially trade him ahead of the deadline? I say buzz, not any really reporting. I haven't heard anything about that. I haven't seen anybody report that specifically. But if he is going to stay here in Boston for the rest of the year, like, he is going to be a big asset for them throughout the remainder of the year, but also come playoff time in particular, because he is a bucket getter. And I think increasingly he's somebody that Joe Mazzulla is trusting, and you're seeing the minutes trend upward alongside that. And the last guy I'll mention here is Luka Garza, who, again, was out of the rotation for about a month and comes back in and continues to find ways to impact this game night in and night out. This is now like 4 or 5 consecutive games that Luka Garza has had a big hand in helping to flip. And in this one, he's a plus 13 in 19 minutes. 15 points for him on 6 of 8 shooting. He makes both of his 3-point attempts. You're giving up a little bit on the defensive end. I think he's improved on that end, like Anfernee as well. Earlier in the season, those two guys were definitely the 2 biggest liabilities in the defensive end, and I think they've both trended upwards quite a bit. But you're getting a lot of other good things, right? You got 4 offensive rebounds from him in this game. He's hit both of his 3-point shots, which he's been shooting really well all season long. This is by far the best 3-point shooting season of his NBA career, and he's kind of shooting like a lot of people expected him to when he first came into the NBA after a great collegiate career. So if you can get instant offense from him, he had a nice little 2-man game going with Jaylen Brown early in this one where He was, screening for Jaylen, cutting to the basket. Jaylen was hitting up some nice passes. I like that action. We don't see a whole lot of that. We've seen a little bit of that with Mimi, but this is a guy that I really think a month ago it looked like maybe he was done for the year, and now here he is. He stayed ready, and he's finding ways to impact winning, and he's doing it with a skill set that he has made the disclaimer many times this year that he is not the most athletic guy, that it's something that he has had to work past his entire career. He brings it up almost every press conference. I did a big story on him. I talked to his dad. His dad stressed that from a young age, everybody knew that he was not athletic and that it was going to be a big thing to overcome. And yet here he is sprinting down the court, bright red, like leaving it all out there, making a huge impact. And again, second best plus minus of the night was to Luka Garza. And it feels like a nightly thing now that he's coming in and he's lifting up the second unit because this starting lineup, again, started a little bit slow. So Josh Minot gets a DNP for the third consecutive game. Jordan Walsh didn't play a whole lot in this one, only 13 minutes for him. Seemed a little step slow in his first stint in particular. We'll keep monitoring that. Not a huge Ugo game. Baylor played some nice fourth quarter minutes. Like those guys kind of shared the load. It was Anfernee that had the bulk of responsibilities in that second half. They went small a little bit with that. We have some Luka Garza down the stretch. So different cast of guys. That's what makes this team special, is that it's not always just it's not going to just be Jordan all year. It's not going to be Ugo all year. If you don't have it, Joe's going to go to the next guy, and somebody is going to bring it. And tonight it was Anfernee Simons, Luka Garza, guys that haven't gotten a ton of buzz or credit this season. It was their night tonight. And obviously the big three of Derrick, Payton, and Jaylen, which is kind of the big three, I think, for this year's Celtics team. They all delivered. They all did what the Celtics needed them to win this game. So it wasn't a perfect one. I thought the defense was a step slow, especially early on. Keontae George lit them up for 37. Yusuf Nurkic looked like an all-star. Whenever I see him going off like that, I feel like that's not a great indictment for your front court defense. But nevertheless, they pull out a win. They're 20-12. It's a great spot to be in. A couple more games here on the road. Sacramento on Thursday, and then I'll be in LA on Saturday against the Clippers, who have been streaking. Seem to be turning the season around. So it'll be interesting to see how the Celtics can kind of handle that. The Kings, not so much. But it's been some really good basketball being played. This has been a fun month of Celtics basketball. If you had told me that on January 1st, they'd be 20-12 with the third seed in the Eastern Conference, and Jaylen Brown was going to be putting up these kinds of numbers, and everybody's kind of finding their role, finding ways to impact winning, I'd be pretty happy with where this team's at. So moment of gratitude for a season that many expected was going to be maybe a wash, a gap year, a tanking year. Like it certainly has not been any of those things. They've been extremely competitive, and every game has been worth watching. Every game's been worth tuning into. So I'm grateful for that. I'm also grateful for all of you for watching this podcast, for listening, whether you do so on YouTube, on Apple, Spotify. As always, leave a comment, leave a like. Let me know what you're grateful for, how much you've enjoyed watching this team throughout the first part here of the season, the 2025 portion of the season. And thank you as always for watching. Check out all of our content on CLNS Media. We have a full hour-and-a-half long show after this game as well with Jimmy Toscano and Bobby Manning. So if you want more Celtics content on this one, you can check that out. And thank you as always for watching. We'll have more coverage coming up later in the week.